time to show the world that top is what I strive for. Greatness is a journey I'm willing to stride for. Consistency is key and I don't take no time off. Against the odds, I put it all on the line for. A lesson learned for every flaw I'm gonna make. Consequence I undertake. Putting all my trust in faith. Failure won't become my fate. 10 toes down, I never fold. Give it all to reach my goal. As my name is Stone, when my story's told. Say I did it for the...
I was reading my news, kind of scrolling through my news feed recently, just this past week, in fact, and I came across this headline that was talking about Peyton Manning's net worth. And I paused when I saw that headline and I thought, that's really none of our business, right? So then I opened the article and I read the entire thing, and because I'm a Peyton Manning fan, and I was just kind of curious. And I don't know, maybe you don't even know who Peyton Manning is. Like, if you have no idea who I'm talking about, he's the guy in all the Nationwide commercials. So that's really what he's more famous for nowadays. But of course, he did play a lot of football back in the day. And so as a lifelong Indianapolis Colts fan, and therefore like a little, few years, a Denver Broncos fan, I've just been a Peyton Manning fan for a long time. And so this did pique my interest, and I did read the article. And, it's pretty impressive, as you would expect when you think about his net worth. It's pretty impressive. I mean, this guy was a very successful professional quarterback, right? In the NFL at one time, one of the highest paid players in the league. So he did all right for himself. Yeah. And then he retired, and I think he's done just as well, maybe even better for himself in his retirement. I mean, he's went through all these endorsements and investments with like Papa John's and then, these TV spots and other things that he's involved in. He's stayed very busy and he's been very successful. And so as I read this article in Men's Journal about Peyton Manning and just his net worth and all that. I mean, again, no surprises. It was very impressive, like in the hundreds of millions of dollars, right? I mean, he's been very, very successful. But you look at a guy like Peyton Manning, as successful as he's been, and it's like everything he touches turns to gold, and it would be easy to look at that and think, must be nice, right? Must be nice, like he's had it easy or something. Like, because I mean, come on, he was born into an elite NFL football family, the Manning family, right? So, I mean, he's always had access to the best trainers. He's always had these resources behind him to make sure he could, take advantage of every opportunity in front of him. So it's like, of course he became a professional athlete. You would expect that. And you might even think, of course he's been successful because he's one of the lucky ones. He got lucky, right? I mean, this success sort of fell on his lap a little bit. It's like, it must be nice. But I think we can put aside the celebrity for just a minute here, because I think we do the same thing with a lot of people in our lives that we look at and we think, wow, look at that couple with an incredible marriage, or that friend who just seems to be crushing it in their career, or that person we know who seems to be so close to God in their faith journey. And we look at them and we think, it must be nice, right? I mean, they must have gotten lucky somehow, like in the right place, in the right time, right set of circumstances. It must be nice. And sure, there's some truth to this. I mean, we can just acknowledge that there's some luck involved here, because some people are dealt a better hand than others. And that's true. But we also need to acknowledge that there's more to it than that, right? Because in most cases, I mean, people who are really successful, whether it's in business or in their relationships or even in their spiritual life, they're not just lucky. They're not just lucky. They're disciplined. They're consistent in that discipline. And here's what's so often true, whether you're a pro athlete or at the top of your field, whatever that looks like, or even if you're just a really good mom or dad, successful people, here's what's true. Successful people do consistently what other people do occasionally, right? And in fact, I've learned a lot and got a lot of advice, a lot of insight on this topic from another pastor named Craig Rochelle. I've mentioned him several times in this series, but that's something that I've heard him say, that successful people do consistently what others do occasionally. I mean, come on, Peyton Manning didn't become an NFL legend and a Hall of Fame quarterback just because his last name is Manning, right? He might have had some things going for him that helped him out initially, but I mean, he got there because he's brilliant and he worked hard and he was disciplined and he was consistent, because nobody just accomplishes something significant on accident, right? I mean, whether it's something in our own lives, if we just apply it to our own lives, I mean, whether it's paying off debt or whether it's building a great marriage or it's growing closer to God, it doesn't just happen. It doesn't just fall into our laps. It's the result of consistently and persistently and patiently working toward those goals over time. And here's where most of us, I think, struggle. We all have good intentions, right? In fact, I would say that probably all of us, we want similar things, but a lot of us have very different results. So why is that? It's because intentions will not get us to our desired destination. Intentions will not get us to the destination that we're hoping to reach because actions determine direction and direction determines destination. And that's kind of an Andy Stanley thing that I picked up over the years. And we've talked about that before here at Cypress as well, that direction, not intention, determines destination. In other words, if you just keep doing what you've always done, then you're going to keep seeing the results that you've always seen, right? That's true for all of us. Because wanting to change and intending to change, none of that's really going to ever change our life. And some of us have been coming to church for a while now. Some of us have been following Jesus for a little while now. And a lot of us, I mean, we talk about transformation, right? We talk about a changed life, but some of us are thinking, I'm just not seeing it in my life. I'm just not seeing it in this specific area where I continue to struggle and I face these battles every single day. Why can't I change? A lot of us find ourselves thinking that at some point or maybe multiple points throughout our journey, why can't I change? And we've all felt this, right? All of us. That frustration of wanting to see change, but feeling stuck. That's what we've been talking about, this idea. We've been talking about this really for the past several weeks. I mean, that's what this series has been about because transformation doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't happen by accident. I mean, throughout this series, we've been really exploring this idea together that our spiritual transformation happens with our cooperation, right? It happens with our cooperation because it's really God who changes our lives, but we have a part to play in that. And so today, as we wrap this series up, here's what I want to submit to you just very humbly. That the life that you want, the life that I want, I mean, all of us, the life that we want, whether it's in your finances or in your friendships or in your marriage or in your health or even in your faith journey, this life that we want will not come from a few lucky decisions. It comes from countless and consistent and seemingly small decisions over time. Because it's the small things that no one sees that leads to the greater reward that I think all of us want. It's consistency and faithfulness in the small things over time. And so here's what I think is really fascinating about this. The Apostle Paul, this guy that we've been looking at for the past several weeks now, the Apostle Paul, this first century pastor, so to speak, a follower of Jesus who went around starting all these new churches, and then he would write letters to these churches. And we've been looking at some of those letters. We're going to look at one again today because this comes out of Galatians, this letter that he wrote to the churches in Galatia. And he cuts straight to the heart of our must be nice kind of thinking with this truth that I think is both simple but also profound. All right, this comes out of Galatians chapter 6, verse 7. So let's look at what Paul writes here. He says, "Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked." Like, can you hear Paul's, like, the seriousness in his tone right here? I mean, Paul's like, don't be foolish. Don't be silly. You know, you can't thumb your nose at God here. And then this, when you get into the original language, that's literally what Paul is saying, because there are principles at work in this universe that are just true, whether we like it or not. These laws of nature that are just true, whether we like it or not. And Paul's about to lay one of these down for us here at the end of verse 7. It's something we're all familiar with, but he says this. He says, "A man reaps what he sows." Now, just to be clear, a woman also reaps what she sows. I don't know why Paul's picking on the guys here, but anyway, it's true for all of us. This is an all skate. We're all included. A person reaps what they sow. And of course, Paul is referring to one of the most familiar experiences in the history of humans, right? This agricultural law that you reap what you sow. In other words, just being very literal with this here, the seeds that you plant into the ground will eventually take root and produce fruit, and they'll bring a harvest, right? So that's kind of the literal thing that Paul's talking about here. But Paul is not just talking to farmers about planting and harvesting. Look what he says here next in verse 8. He says, "Whoever sows to please their flesh, from the flesh will reap destruction. Whoever sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life." Okay, so now when Paul's talking about sowing, he's not talking about actual seeds anymore, right? He's talking about our decisions. He's talking about our actions and how they impact our lives and really our spiritual transformation. And he's basically saying this really just boils down to every move you make, every breath you take, every smile you fake, every vow you break. I mean, when I was writing this, I just started to drift into these song lyrics by the Police. So I think you get the idea, right? These are the things that we sow in our lives and throughout our lives that will eventually take root and produce fruit and bring a harvest in our lives. And again, a person reaps what they sow. And there's multiple layers to this now, just a few layers that I kind of want to pull back and take a closer look at with you. And the first one, Paul just makes this really simple. What you sow is what you grow, right? What you sow is what you grow. And this just means that when you plant a literal seed, when you know what that seed is, you don't have to guess and you don't have to wonder what's going to grow from that seed. And can you imagine if it didn't work like this, right? You've got a bunch of seeds that you know what they are, but you put them in the ground and you're thinking, well, I wonder what we'll get this time. It would be anarchy in the world, right? It would never work. So Amanda and I, when the last house that we lived in Indiana before we moved down here a few years ago, was a house that was a brand new construction, newly built home. And when we moved into this house, it was late enough in the year that they hadn't put the yard in yet. And so what that meant was the following spring, I had the privilege of being a grass farmer, as I called myself, a grass farmer, which it was just regular grass. It wasn't the other kind of grass, but didn't want you to get the wrong idea. So anyway, they came and they had a professional company come out and actually seed the yard for us. And then it was up to me to make sure that seed got watered and fertilized and then watered some more. And then I had to aerate it, and then water it some more. And I kept watering it. And, we got the first water bill. And I thought, man, we could have just installed AstroTurf and I think it would have saved us a little bit of money, But after all this work and after, in the middle of trying to grow this grass, every day I was watching this yard like a hawk, just waiting for something to grow. And then one day, to my surprise, I look out there and there's something growing. I wasn't surprised, however, to see that it was grass because that's what we planted. And so what else would we see? To be fair, there were also some dandelions, which I don't know. I found out in the last service, we don't actually have dandelions down here. But we definitely had them up north. And then they're one of those things you don't actually have to plant. They just show up on their own. So we had a few of those as well. But this is the law of the harvest, right? The law of the harvest. What you sow is what you grow. Now, when we apply this to our lives, Paul makes this pretty clear. That if we sow bad seeds, we grow bad fruit. So if I sow seeds of anger and bitterness and dishonesty, that's the fruit that I'll grow from those seeds, right? The fruit of distrust and discontentment and loneliness. And if we dwell on our anxious thoughts and if we fixate on those appetites and those cravings and if we continue to go back to those bad habits, that's what we're sowing. And the fruit isn't good, right? In fact, Paul calls it destruction in the verse we just looked at a moment ago. He calls that kind of fruit destruction in our lives. And when things go sideways in our relationships and when our lives start to feel like they're going off the rails, we think we're being punished for all those bad things we did and all those decisions that we made. But it's not a punishment. It's a harvest. It's a harvest. Do you realize how much responsibility this places on us for the trajectory of our lives and for our spiritual transformation? Because Paul is saying that we decide what that harvest will look like. We decide what the harvest will be because a person reaps what they sow. You and I reap what we sow. That means that if you're not happy with what's growing, then change what you're sowing. Right? We have the freedom and the opportunity to do that. And so that's kind of the first thing. You grow, what you sow is what you grow. That's kind of the first layer, but then we pull back the next one. And it's this idea that the more you sow, the more you grow. Right? The more you sow, the more you grow. We didn't want just a little bit of grass growing in our yard, right? We didn't want a little bit over here and a little bit over there and kind of growing sparsely throughout. We wanted a thick, green, lush yard, that's what we were going after. So we didn't plant just a little bit or throw down just a little bit of seed. We sowed a lot of seed, right? All over the place. In fact, we had to do it 2 or 3 times, keep reseeding it because the more you sow, the more you grow. Think of it like this. Growth always follows investment, right? It follows investment. So the question isn't, how much do I have to do? The question is, how much do I want to grow? Paul says it this way in another letter that he wrote to the churches in Corinth. In 2 Corinthians, he said this. We can put that on the screens for us real quick here. Okay, remember this, Paul says. A farmer who plants only a few seeds will get a small crop, but the one who plants generously will get a generous crop. You might have heard it said this way. You get out what you put in, right? You get out what you put in. I mean, you can apply that to just about any area of your life. I mean, your marriage, your career, your friendships, and yes, even our faith journeys. And so that means that if we want to experience a life that has been completely changed and completely transformed, then we have to be willing to sow consistently and intentionally into those areas of our lives that matter most. So if I'm sowing kind of half-heartedly, when I feel like it, and maybe I'll get around to it later, unless of course I decide to sleep in, or maybe Netflix just dropped a new show, and so I'm going to binge that for a few hours instead. Unless some other better offer comes along, kind of approach. Like, if that's the portion that I'm sowing, then that's how much I'm growing. But when I'm intentionally and consistently pursuing Jesus through the scriptures and through prayer and through the faith community and the relationships that we have here. And when I'm devoting myself to his teachings and to the way of Jesus and the practices of Jesus, and when I begin to put those things into practice in my own life and begin to live those things out, like when that's what I'm intentionally sowing more and more, then I'm growing more and more in those ways. Because it's not what we do occasionally that makes a difference. It's what we do consistently. And so that means we need to ask ourselves, is it time to change not only what we're sowing, but how much we're sowing? Because the more you sow, the more you grow. And then the last little layer that I want to pull back here with you really briefly here is what you sow doesn't grow overnight. It doesn't grow overnight. So when I was trying to get this yard to come in, one thing I wasn't prepared for was how discouraging that process would be, right? Because, after all that sowing, after all the seeding and reseeding, and after all the watering and fertilizing and, all of that work and all that effort, the results came slow and frustrating, right? It was incredibly frustrating because I just wanted a lush green lawn like all my neighbors had, but it wasn't coming in like that. In fact, it was just kind of coming in spotty a little bit. And even the grass that was growing, when I did a side-by-side comparison, it's like their grass is still greener. Like it's still greener on their side, right? And so, I just wasn't happy with the results. And so, what I thought would happen in one season ended up extending into another season and extending into the season after that. And so at that point, it's like every time I went to move the sprinklers and every time I thought about putting more fertilizer on the lawn and every time I thought about doing more work and more investment, I started to think to myself, what's the point? Right? What's the point? It's not working. After all that work already, my lawn doesn't look like their lawn, and maybe it's never going to look like their lawn. So what's the point? And I think this is the challenge for a lot of us in our faith journey where so many of us get stuck. Because the way this works is, of course, we know this, that we plant in one season, but then we harvest in another season. And all of us get that in strictly agricultural terms, but when we apply that and we experience that in our faith journeys, it feels different. And so often what happens in our spiritual journeys is that we're trying to make these small changes and little steps toward the bigger changes, and we're sowing and we're sowing and we're trying so hard, but then we don't see the results that we're hoping for. And we get discouraged. You're thinking, I went to the gym 3 times last week and I still managed to gain weight. Like it's not working, right? I made it all week without eating a single donut, but then Saturday morning I ate all of my donuts and some of my kids' donuts too, Yeah. I read my Bible 5 days last week, but then I still lost it on that guy at work. It's not working. Nothing I do seems to be working. And we go through these setbacks and we start to think, it doesn't matter. Nothing I do seems to matter. But that's not true. In fact, every action, even the smallest steps that we take, becomes the direction in which your life is moving. We look at those moments as just, kind of one-off decisions, but in fact, each one is a direction that our life begins to take. And it's the little things that we do over time with persistence and patience that add up to the big changes that we want to see happening down the road. That's why Paul says this in verse 9. In verse 9, he says, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." At the proper time, Paul says. When the time comes, you will reap what you've been sowing if you don't give up. It's not going to happen overnight. But what you sow is what will grow. And the more you sow, the more you'll grow. And here's Paul's point. His point, kind of the main idea of this whole thing, is that you sow, God grows. You sow, God grows. It's ultimately God's Spirit alive in us, changing us and growing us. But he's given us the responsibility to cooperate with his transforming grace throughout our faith journey. So it's like, keep doing your part, God says. You do what you can do. I'll do the rest at the proper time. And I love how St. Augustine said this, and a quote that I captured recently. He said, "Without God, we cannot. Without us, God will not. We sow, but it's God who grows us. And it's God who grows us, but he expects us to do some sowing. And without that cooperation, without this partnership with God, working together with the Holy Spirit, we'll always be asking ourselves, why can't I change? Why isn't this working? You know, when Paul talks about sowing to please the Spirit, what we read in this passage just a little bit ago, sowing to please the Spirit, it's really just another way of saying that we're keeping in step with the Spirit. We're walking in faith, as we've been talking about this in various ways for the past several weeks now, and it's really this idea. I mean, walking in step with the Spirit or sowing to please the Spirit. It's this idea that we're recognizing in every moment, in every challenge, in every temptation, every weakness, it's not my strength, but his. It's the Holy Spirit inside of me, empowering me and teaching me and guiding me and helping me to do the next right thing in front of me. And here's what this means for us. It means that change happens when we cooperate with God by sowing small, intentional actions that align with his Spirit within us. Like choosing patience with our kids, or choosing to prioritize our marriage, choosing to resist that temptation in the moment, choosing to open ourselves up and bringing others into our journey and sharing our struggles and our habits and our hang-ups within those relationships. It's choosing to set aside that time in the scriptures and guarding that time. It's choosing to practice the discipline to say yes to what is right and no to what is wrong. In all of these small and sometimes unnoticed actions, we're sowing to please the Spirit. And it's not easy. It's not always easy. And at times the journey will be incredibly disheartening and frustrating. And there will be times when it feels like we're just never going to get there. It's never going to happen. This isn't working. I'll never change. But remember this, that the journey isn't measured by the harvest we hope for tomorrow, but by the seeds we're planting today. It's not measured by this thing, this future kind of distant harvest on the horizon and thinking maybe we'll never get there, but it's measured by the seeds that we're planting today. So here's what we can do in response to this. Start sowing what you want God to grow in your life. Sow what you want God to grow in your life. In fact, let's just kind of make this even more practical, a little more actionable for us this morning. Just pick one area in your life where you really want to grow. One area in your life where you desperately want to see some change happening. And maybe a few things come to mind for you, like for a lot of us, and it might be more than one thing, but just focus on one, because if it's even two or three, it's going to get overwhelming and discouraging. So one thing, maybe it's an area where you desperately want to grow as a parent. Or maybe it's somehow or something related to your finances. Maybe it's something in your faith journey. And you want to grow closer to God through a discipline with prayer or through a discipline with the scriptures. It could be related to a part of your life where you continue to struggle and you fight these daily battles and you want to grow and change in that area. Maybe it's something in the area of forgiveness. Whatever it is, just pick one area where you want to see real and lasting change. And when you know what that is, here's the next step. What can you start sowing right now for that to start growing in your life? I mean, just one small, consistent action that you can start taking every day. What does that look like? And whatever that is, here's the thing. It's almost always going to come down to some form of discipline. It's going to take discipline, whatever that is. And we've been talking about this for the past few weeks now throughout this series, this idea of discipline, but we've been defining discipline this way, which I think is so helpful, that discipline is simply choosing what we want most over what we want now. Choosing what we want most over what we want now. And the thing that we want most, that thing that we want most, kind of this thing that's on the horizon, this harvest in front of us, I mean, it's what we've been referring to throughout this series as the greater reward, right? The greater reward that's in front of us. I mean, here's what that greater reward can look like and what it looks like. It looks like freedom from that addiction. It looks like a more loving mom or dad. It looks like a more peaceful and joyful marriage. It looks like a life that honors God as we're growing closer to Him. That's the harvest. That's what we're sowing so that we can grow. And we'll reap that harvest if we don't give up. That's why Paul says, keep on sowing. Don't give up. Keep on sowing consistently and persistently. Keep choosing what you want most over what you want now. Keep reminding yourself that as a follower of Jesus, you belong to Him. You belong to Jesus. That is who you are. That is your identity. And because of that, His Spirit inside of you is stronger than the wrong desires inside of you. Keep that picture of what that greater reward looks like in front of you, that freedom, that growth, that changed life, that greater reward. Keep it in front of you and let that become the deeper why that's driving you and motivating you to keep on sowing. Keep on sowing to please the Spirit. One step of faith after another. Just doing the next right thing in front of you. You sow, God grows. And this is how we change gradually over time. This is how we cooperate with God's transforming grace throughout our faith journeys. And it won't happen overnight. But don't give up. Keep on sowing. Pete Scazzaro, who is he was a pastor for a lot of years, and he's now kind of working in a organization, nonprofit that helps pastors and other followers of Jesus grow as apprentices of Jesus. And he's done some fantastic work and written a lot of great books. But anyway, he said something that I think just gives us a beautiful picture of how this plays out in our lives with consistency and persistence over the long haul. And actually, he was sharing some advice that was given to him from an older and wiser mentor. But here's what he said, and I thought this was so interesting. He said, and I captured this quote for us, he said, but the best decade of your life will be your 70s. The second best will be your 80s. And the third will be your 60s. I mean, this is incredible, right? This is so interesting. And what he's saying here is that these can be the decades in our lives that will be the richest and the most joyful and the most helpful for others because of what God has been growing in our lives, because of the seeds that we've been sowing. Right. And so, I mean, doesn't this just give you like a whole new vision for what these later years in life can look like for us? Or maybe it's the season of life you're in now, but the season of life that's ahead of us for others of us. It's incredible to think. And some of us, as we think about this and we look at, okay, the best decades ahead of us are in our 70s and 80s and 60s. And some of us are thinking, so it's going to take me 30 or 40 years to get there? Probably. But don't let that discourage you. And don't lose sight of the bigger picture. Because the choices that you make today, the seeds that you're sowing right now, are building a future filled with God's greater reward. Not only for you, but for those closest to you, your family, your church, your community, and future generations yet to come. So keep on sowing. Right? Let me pray for us. What an incredible picture to have in front of us, Father. That as we remain faithful, as we remain consistent, as we continue to do what we can do in this faith journey, Lord, you promise to do what only you can do. To grow us and to change us, to transform us, to help us live into this greater reward that you have in front of us. A life that is just full of joy and peace and love and all the things you talk about with the fruit of the Spirit. These things can become realities in our life as you continue to transform us from the inside out. So Father, help us as human beings as we try to cooperate with you. Help us to see where we can begin sowing today that will bring us to an experience of that harvest on the horizon. We love you, Father. We love you, Jesus. Amen. All right. Thank you, Cypress. I hope you have a wonderful, beautiful Thanksgiving celebration with friends and family, loved ones, whether you're staying here or traveling. Have a safe and happy Thanksgiving. And I look forward to seeing you back here next week. We're going to be kicking off a brand new series, and I'm really excited about that. So we'll see you soon. Have a blessed week.